what we try to do. So we are beginning and going live a little bit before 7. So, and
So
thankfully,
Jeremy, out
still
of curiosity, you guys sending crews out west or anything like that, or is there any?
Yeah, we've got a 2 engines out in California right now. A couple of guys just got back from a rotation. They just switched out with a couple more guys, so there is a little activity, but for the most part, it's been pretty slow out there, at least in the lower 48.
Okay.
Canada's been obviously been busy.
Yeah.
What's the outlook for Canada? I mean, what are they able to somehow get this under control? I mean, what's the end game here?
Well, Canada's a pretty remote country. So I got a feeling a lot of those fires are probably going to burn until either the rain comes or the snow flies.
Wow. Okay.
That's the honest truth on it. And
Yeah. It's a shame. And this is way above norm, right? I mean,
yeah, I think I'm not for certain exactly what happened, but the lower 48 got a pretty heavy snow year this year, kind of record breaking in a lot of places. And I think that is a result of or their fire is a result of us getting that moisture.
Okay.
Not them.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I know like the US part of the Northern Rockies is getting a lot of rain, and it's just been like unusually wet, and almost like in Florida, you can almost time it every day based on when you get the rain kind of thing in the afternoons and stuff.
And that's good for our forests out there. They need that. They don't need it burn anymore, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they need a break.
Yeah.
So for those that are just joining us, we'll be starting the presentation in just a few minutes. We're glad you're here, and we'll get started in just a minute. So yeah, I was just down in Florida. I was on vacation for a week, and every day it rained every day. And you would think, oh, great, it's going to cool it off. Nah, just makes it more humid.
We've had our fair share of that up here the last couple of weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. Funny is that the time that I was down there, it was pretty much the same here, So, I mean, I've been down in Florida where everybody says, oh, you're going to Florida in the summer, you're crazy, right? And it was actually hotter up here than down there. So you never know.
I saw one day the dew point was like 77 degrees, which is like, it's just holding a lot of moisture.
Yeah.
It was so disgusting outside.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Well, it is a little after 7, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for joining us for the New Jersey Forestry Association's monthly Backyard Forestry in 90 Minutes online. My name is Lori Jensen. I'm the Executive Director of the Forestry Association, and super happy that you're here. Like usual, we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to stop in and say hi, you can post that in the chat. I'll probably answer after the video just to keep things moving along. But during the video or during any part of this presentation, if you have questions, just pop them in the Q&A, and then we will answer them at the end of the video. So I'm very pleased to have 2 wonderful guests this evening. We have Matthew Olson, Assistant Professor of Environmental Science Program Forestry at Stockton University. Hi, Matt. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. And then Jeremy Weber, Division Forest Fire. I knew I was going to mess this up. Division Forest Fire Warden of the New Jersey Forest Service. So Jeremy, great to see you again. I think you actually came to one of our first backyard forestry in person that we did up at Frelinghuysen. Remember that? We were in the thing. Short couple months later, we shut that down, unfortunately. But that's when we, moved over to the virtual, and it's been pretty good. So we get to access and get this message out to a lot more people. So we're okay with this for now. So just some quick things. Again, I told you about the Q&A in the chat, and then just a reminder that we do this every 3rd Thursday of the month, so please mark that on your calendar. We actually have registration open for August, so we'd love to have you join us for that. What we're doing is we're going to have Kristen Meistrel from Vice President of Stewardship from New Jersey Audubon talking forestry for the birds. Registration is up, so in my emails, there's a link, and I'll try to pop the link in the chat if I can later on. If you're not a member of the Forestry Association, we would love to have you join. We do a lot. The board of directors is very dedicated to what they do, and we would love to have you join. These are just some of the benefits. We do newsletters. We have the website with a lot of information on it. We finally got back to doing annual meetings in person, which super excited with that. We have the Woodland Stewards program back in person again. It's actually this September. So if you're interested in that, feel free to send me an email or whatever. I can give you some details on that. It's a 3.5-day kind of immersive program. Andy Kim used to always like to say that was like camp for adults. So it's a really great venue. We'd love to have you join us for that. Backyard Forestry is what we're doing tonight. We do lots of different meetings and events. Actually, some of the board is attending meetings representing landowners or woodland owners tonight. We do that all the time, and we also monitor legislation that affects you. So again, if you're not a member, we would encourage you and hope that you would join. You just go to the website to join or send me an email and I'll send you some information. Okay, if you missed a Backyard Forestry, we've been doing this online now for a couple of years, really since COVID. So we have many of the presentations up on YouTube. So that's just a little thing where you can go and check us out on YouTube. And so I did introduce you guys before, but here's just the slide with all your logos. So again, welcome and thank you for being here. And before we actually start the video in keeping the Pinelands, Matt, you were just going to give us a little overview about this because you're actually part of it. So Matt, take it away.
Yeah, so this is my claim to fame here. So being a part of this video. Yeah, so thank you, Lori, for the introduction. So I don't need to reintroduce myself, I suppose. But yeah, so the video we're going to be airing tonight, this showcases the good work that's being done in the New Jersey Pinelands. Although I do prefer to use the name Pine Barrens because I feel like that's actually a little more characteristic of the ecosystem as opposed to Pinelands, but whatever. I wasn't a part of naming the video, so they didn't ask for my input on that. But yeah, so this is a video that you're going to be seeing that features some folks that I'm sure you know, maybe some folks that you don't know. And so like Bob Williams is a part of this with Pine Creek Forestry, Kristen Weistrel with New Jersey Audubon. It also features myself and my students, my forest measurements class from the spring semester. So it's really cool. My students got really excited about being involved with this. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then also several others that got involved with this. And so really, when I think of the intention of the video, it's kind of like multifaceted, but I would say for the most part, the real intention is just about increasing awareness of a few things, like just kind of the uniqueness of the Pine Barrens ecosystem, I think being a big one. Also addressing some of the current threats to its ecological integrity. But then it also kind of ends, and I would see even kind of weave throughout, it's just really the role of active forest management and helping to mitigate some of these threats. So things like climate change and southern pine beetle and things of that nature. So there's really a lot of components to it. It talks about the social side and the science side of things and everything else. So it's pretty cool that way. So this is really my first time ever doing this type of video special. So it was kind of a new thing for me, which was pretty fun to be a part of. And my students, they were very excited to take part in this. In fact, it really was like the day of that I informed them of the details that there's going to be a video crew out there and everything. And despite like being told that day, they were sports. They were fine about it. So I guess with that, so I would say break out the popcorn for a 27-minute video here. I wouldn't quite call it a masterpiece, but it's I still think entertaining, and I hope you enjoy it. And then kind of as Lori mentioned, Jeremy is with us as well. So Jeremy with Forest Fire Service, the two of us are going to be providing some additional insights on fire ecology and management to follow the video. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions from us, and we'll do our best to field those. So yeah, with that, Lori, I think that covers it.
All right, let's run the show. But you had to mention popcorn, huh? So if I go out for a little bit, you know where I'm going, okay? So, okay, so here we go, guys. I'm going to give this a shot. So hang in there for just a minute so I can pull that up. And of course, it doesn't look like it's here, but it should be. So give me a minute. And where are you? There it is. Okay, and I'm going to ask my presenters to just say that you can see this when, or hear it when it starts, okay? So looking good so far?
Yep.
Recently, about 10,000
Good.
years ago,
Yeah.
the first humans arrived on the scene. They found a newly forested landscape.
At the end of the Ice Age, we had a glacier that started at the North Pole that was over a mile thick. It was 800 feet thick over top of New York City, and then it ended north of here at about New Brunswick, New Jersey. So this area here was tundra. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey are really this periglacial environment, meaning an area right next to a glacier. It's the kind of land that you would find in Alaska today, but now it's in a more temperate climate and it's been vegetated by the pine forests.
In 1978, over 1 million acres of the New Jersey Pinelands, the largest area of open space left between Richmond and Boston, became the country's first national reserve. President Carter signed the bill, which came with the promise of money to help the state start buying land. The idea was to save ecologically important areas where people were already living and working, not getting rid of development, but limiting it for a more sustainable future. A year later, Governor Burns signed a bill giving this idea real power.
That controversial ban on building in the Pinelands is now law. Governor Burns signed the measure today in a ceremony that reflected none of the bitter debate over the bill. As part of the ceremony, a passage from John McPhee's book on the Pinelands was read, a passage that predicts the Pine Barrens would ultimately be paved over by developers.
I told John at that time that I was going to prove him wrong. We did. I'm going to prove him wrong.
John McPhee's book about the Pine Barrens described a separate world, one left out of the 20th century's mad rush to modernize and develop. People and their use of the land were always part of the equation. With that idea in mind, UNESCO named the New Jersey Pinelands a biosphere reserve in the 1980s, one of hundreds around the world.
Biosphere reserves are not about nature conservation. They are about people.
They are sites designated by UNESCO that find creative, effective ways for people and nature to thrive together.
There have been people in the Pinelands for thousands of years. But today, the forests are fragmented by roads and surrounded by development. The climate is growing hotter and sea level is rising. As big as they are, the forests of the Pine Barrens live in our world now, and they're not going to thrive without our help.
When some of the earliest settlers came to New Jersey and other parts of the eastern seaboard, they described almost park-like experiences, right? They would walk into the forest and see an area that looked like kind of the forest that is behind me, right? Scattered trees, more grasses in between. Tens of thousands of years before Europeans came, there were things like hurricanes that came through every 100 years or so that would maybe take out 70% of the canopy. You would have fire come through these areas. So in southern New Jersey, that could be anywhere from 6 to 12 years that a fire would come through. So there were a lot of different things that were shaping our forests.
The natural processes of, for instance, fire, which is the big issue of today, can't function like it did actually for thousands of years. However, even that fire, in large part, was influenced by human beings. Native Americans were always here. They were always managing and manipulating the forest to get what they needed. Better forage for game, it attracted game. Better reproduction of berries that they depended upon. And over the millennia, the ecology actually adapted to them, and they became one together. They sustain the environment. And that is my view of what we should be doing in forestry today.
All right, so for today, we're going to be working on permanent plots in the fire interval experiment. And so I know probably several of you have been out here. I know Zach just yesterday was out here. I have my forest measurements class out here today. And what they're doing is helping us with fire effects monitoring.
And today we're just measuring a bunch of trees. There are a bunch of plots out here that were measured some years ago. So we just want to see any updates. How much has it grown? Are they still even there?
Measuring these shortleaf and pitch pine trees, some as tall as 70 feet, is part of an experiment taking place over decades on the forested campus of Stockton University.
And 37533.
The question is, how does the frequency of fire change the ecosystem? What grows? What thrives? What disappears? To find out, they're burning 21 plots at different intervals.
Every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, every 4 years, every 5 years, and then every 10 years and every 15 years. This is kind of a classic example where sometimes you don't need statistics to show you that something is having an effect. So in this case, just by looking at the shrub layer and some of the differences between the shrub layers in these different units, we can start seeing some of the effects that the fires are having. So for example, over here, we have a unit that is burned every year. And we try to burn it every year. It's burned 6 of the last 7 years. And so in this case, it's really reduced the shrub cover. Some other types of native warm season grasses are starting to grow in the understory again. We're seeing a lot of bracken ferns starting to come back.
An increasingly rare native plant of the Pine Barrens has also appeared, the pink lady slipper orchid.
And I haven't seen them really anywhere else on that study. It seems too coincidental for it not to be related to that frequent fire.
This is one of the most unique ecosystems in the world. Pitch pine, for example, which is so abundant here, it's resistant to all kinds of fire, and it's not as scary as people think it is.
They get this damage, but that makes them thrive. Like, it's just such a weird phenomenon. I think it's very cool that it does what it wants, and it bounces back all the time.
Every year between January and March, forest fire teams are out doing prescribed burns all over the Pinelands.
0% chance of precip,
Their goal is 30,000 acres. But New Jersey has a lot of roads and houses, even in the Pine Barrens, and it's not easy to make the decision to light a fire.
I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, looked at the weather, and made the decision at like 6 o'clock this morning that we were gonna burn it. We have to go by a pretty strict burn plan. Wind speeds, relative humidity values, temperatures, things like that.
Because the wind's going to shift to the east.
Yeah, it's pushing east a little bit here also, so.
Yeah, so have people going from the plow line to Pomona Road, like on the right-hand side.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Because it's been used here for so long, like people are just accustomed to seeing it. Like it's been sold in a way to the public that it's beneficial. And that's really the essential kind of primary objective behind the burns, is to reduce those hazardous fuels to prevent the really big wildfires from causing a lot of damage.
The unburned forest is at very high risk of wildfire, heavy fuel loads, heavy fuel ladder. Fire will spread quickly through there and not be controllable. And this situation is common throughout southern New Jersey. Most forests are fire excluded. They've not been allowed to burn. In many cases, because we've done such a great job at putting fires out, we now have a lot of forests that you can't even risk a prescribed fire that would reduce the fire hazard because the risk is too high. That fire is going to get out of control. And in those cases, we need to go in mechanically and remove trees and brush and what have you to get the forest back on track.
It's a tricky problem. The pine barrens are fire adapted, but fire can get out of control and be dangerous, especially in overgrown forests near where people live. That's why many restoration efforts begin with mechanical cutting and thinning. It's what New Jersey Audubon did in their Hovnanian sanctuary.
This forest was, like many other forests in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, very heavily overstocked. That required bringing in machines, bringing in chainsaws, taking out some of the trees, and then following it up with prescribed fire. But really what that has done is it's opened up the canopy, it's given more sunlight to the forest floor. It's then also kind of sparked this whole regeneration process that the forests, do just naturally. We're seeing grasses come in that we wouldn't have normally seen. The trees that are growing here are growing nice and big and strong, and they'll be able to withstand, these stressors for years to come.
All over the world, trees are being stressed. They're vulnerable, and out-of-control wildfires, beetle infestations, and sea level rise are killing them. They're called ghost forests.
First time I came across the term ghost forest is out in southwestern Colorado. We're losing vast stands of trees.
Best known for her Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Maya Lin focuses much of her work on the environment. In 2021, she created a ghost forest in Madison Square Park in Manhattan, using Atlantic white cedars that were victims of climate change. She found these giant trees in a cedar swamp in New Jersey. They had died because of saltwater inundation.
The first time down, when we were driving through some of the stands that were really hit hard by Hurricane Sandy, I took pictures. It was haunting. Areas closer to the coast, it is just gone. These areas are now kind of way too marshy to even begin to try to regenerate. We have very little time, but I am going to be absolutely an optimist. This is the time when you absolutely don't give up. This is when you work even harder. Anything we can all do.
Too much salt water kills them, but with open space and the right amount of fresh water, Atlantic white cedar regenerates quickly. Forester Bob Williams worked with artist Maya Lin to find the trees for her ghost forest. He also works to restore cedar swamps.
I think this young forest is the solution that Maya Lin is trying to talk about. It's great to be concerned, it's great to get upset from some of the negative things we see happening to the forest because of climate change. But there are solutions. All these trees are natural. We didn't plant any trees here, which is amazing. Cedar is a prolific tree when given the right conditions to grow and regenerate. Here we see 5 or 6 trees. Most of them are small, dying because of the dominant tree is taking over this area of the forest. And that's the nature of most species. You start out with a lot of trees. The superior genetics of some trees start to dominate in the canopy. They shade out these die off, and trees will be dying off in here for the right reason for decades to come, not the wrong reasons. And these dominant trees are the trees that will become your 100 or 200-year-old Atlantic white cedar forest. It grows on mucky ground. There are places where you can walk and you think you're floating. They're unique and they're almost a monoculture, but if you walk into them, they're aesthetically magnificent and I think spiritually.
Atlantic white cedar was once a major presence on the eastern seaboard. Now, less than 10% of these forests remain. The largest stands left anywhere, about 25,000 acres, are in southern New Jersey. Most of these forests are in the area covered by the Pinelands Protection Act, including a few owned by farmers, like Bill Haynes.
I'm a fourth-generation cranberry grower on this property. I was started by my great-grandfather, Martin L. Haynes, in about 1890. The reason we have so much forest land is that we understood that to protect what we did, grow cranberries and then blueberries, we needed to protect the water supply. We still are, all about the water, all about the water. And so over the 130 years, we've acquired, close to 14,000 acres of land. In some ways that's not as impressive as it sounds because nobody else wanted it when we started. You buy it for 50 cents an acre, you could get it at a tax sale. I'm talking about my grandfather and my dad's day.
Requiring that if we are going to preserve the Pinelands, and again I emphasize...
The Haynes family farm was one of many private properties swept into the Pinelands Protection Act in 1979.
Build around the fringes of it and forget the...
I mean, to be honest, cranberry growers and farmers and landowners, all of those were opposed to it because we didn't think it was fair. We agreed that all of this should remain the Pinelands and not be paved over. We were all on that same page, but we felt we were being asked to bear the burden of that for the benefit of everybody else.
The Pinelands Protection Act includes both a protection area, where some development is allowed, and a stricter preservation area. That's where Pine Island Cranberry is located.
And here, in the preservation area, we can only grow cranberries or blueberries, do forestry, and keep bees. So we better be good at what we do, because there's not really an out, unless you want to sell it to the state. But at the same time, it's probably the best place to farm in the state of New Jersey. It's a mixed blessing, I guess is the best way I can put it.
For Bill Haynes, it's helped to find the right people to work with over the years.
The most recent example is New Jersey Audubon. We probably don't agree on everything, but we agree on stuff and we can work together on that.
For a few years, New Jersey Audubon released bobwhite quail at Pine Island Cranberry. It was a study to see if this once common bird could be reintroduced to New Jersey.
Yep, go for it. That was cool. That was pretty cool.
In 2019, there was a report that came out that said, since 1970, we have lost almost 3 billion birds. And that is a staggering number. That's just North America. Part of the reason behind that decline is habitat loss. Habitat loss could be actual conversion, so a habitat that was suitable that is now a housing development or a shopping mall. But it could also be a decline of suitable habitat. Young forest disappearing or grassland habitat disappearing.
The open savanna and grasslands at Pine Island Cranberry are rare in New Jersey, even in the Pinelands. They're also intentional, part of a mosaic of forest types created with management techniques like thinning and burning, even clear cutting.
As a kid, exploring the cedar swamp and finding the old corduroy roads when the cedar was cut before, probably 80 or 100 years ago. The cedar swamp is a beautiful place, so quiet and so peaceful. And ours was, some of it in areas was going backwards. Almost 20 years ago now, we decided to get serious about it and created a plan and got it approved by the Pinelands Commission.
Actively managing their land meant thinking critically about the health of their forests. It didn't mean just letting them be. But for the Haynes family, it also had to be sustainable.
It pays for itself, okay? When we cut the cedar, it pays for the rest of the stuff we do for forestry. Like if we weren't in the cranberry business, forestry would not save us, right? So it's not about that, it's about taking care of the land.
From the 1700s on, the Pinelands were clear-cut over and over again to supply wood to help build the nation and to make charcoal to fuel it. The last original forests in New Jersey were cut in the 1860s, yet they continued to regenerate, providing a way of life for many. In his 1967 book, John McPhee described this world as one where people would rather live than make a lot of money. A series of short films made in the 1980s told some of their stories, including the story of this father and son pair of cedar farmers.
It'll make you old fast out there in the woods. It's like you're walking on a mattress. Brush is up and down, and you go out there and you work a day, you're tired when you come home.
This is the regeneration of another forest, another cedar stand, and it takes so much sunlight and so much moisture for these to germinate, and the conditions are just right for the tree to grow. So this is the beginning of another cedar stand. In 100 years, another 100 years, we'll cut it off.
The Shire Brothers sawmill has been in operation since the 1930s.
We use the trees that grow locally, Atlantic white cedar mostly, some white pine, white oak. We're using the native product. We're not taking oil and converting it into plastic fencing. We try to use every part of the tree.
Shire Brothers Sawmill produces shingles for historic houses, some in Cape May. They also make the parts for the channel markers used throughout the waterways of New Jersey.
It marks the channel, so you know where to basically drive your boat so you don't end up running aground on a sandbar.
But staying in business is a problem. Local mills, once common in South Jersey, have almost disappeared. There just aren't enough trees being cut to keep them running. That's especially true for Atlantic white cedar.
Taxes in New Jersey are not cheap, and even on swampland, it's still an extra cost. The state is one of the few people who buys cedar swamps and swampland. So the state now owns, I guess, a larger percentage of our swampland.
And wood is rarely ever cut on state land, partly because of public opinion.
You know, we own the land, don't touch it, don't cut the trees.
The priority is restoration first. Let's get it back. I feel like on public land, we should be getting it back and primarily leaving it alone and grow it for centuries. Along the way, there's a lot of cedar stands that have fallen down. They're rotting away. We could be salvaging and using that wood while restoring those sites to make sure cedar comes back. So you have a real opportunity to bring economics and ecological restoration together.
The climate is changing, and Atlantic white cedar near the coast is dying, but inland, it can still be restored. Pine forests in New Jersey present a different picture. There are more of them, for one thing, and most of them are middle-aged, with fewer younger or older forests than in the past.
We have such an incredible opportunity to be able to do something with those 80 to 100-year-old forests, right? In some instances, we can leave those forests be. That's an important piece of that. You know, we can also use this as an opportunity to create early successional and young forest habitat.
It's really about almost like collaborating with nature more than anything else, but it's basically creating opportunities for other organisms to exist because they have just as much right to this planet as we do. The science is there, that I think it's our responsibility to step in.
Science is helping us better understand and emulate natural systems. People are also learning to build more sustainably with wood. It's exactly what they're doing at the new Edelman Fossil Park and Museum.
This is the largest public building to be a net zero facility in New Jersey. And the use of wood is important because wood is a renewable resource. It is also a carbon sink. It takes carbon and CO2 out of the atmosphere, embeds it in the trees, and while it's used here, all that carbon is still held in that material.
Ecological forest management is a way that people are collaborating with nature, not exploiting it. Keeping the Pinelands, the unique, vast forests of the Pine Barrens, means working to ensure their future. and ours.
Right now, the Earth is flying into a number of existential environmental crises. We have the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and we can see in the fossil record that things can change. Things can go off the rails quite severely and have in the past. And there's nothing in science, there's nothing in the record of the past that says that the Earth has to be always like we want it to be in the future. That's a future that we have to fight for, and that future is not going to happen unless we recognize the contingencies of the past and work together to make the future that we all want.
Wow, that was incredible. I can't believe that. What was that, like 30 minutes or more? It seemed like it was 2 minutes. Crazy. When's part 2 coming out? Okay. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that. Let's see. I think bravo, great video. Thanks, Richard. It really was. And I'm not sure, but I think Bob Williams was going to actually attend tonight. I'm not sure if he's on. If he is, make sure you say hi in the chat at least. So it was great. And the other thing I want to mention before, Jeremy, if you're good, we'll start with you as far as some commentary or whatnot. But one thing I wanted to mention is, Kristen was highlighted on this, and she is going to be our presenter next month. So if you don't have the link to join, I'll make sure it gets up on Forestry Association website. But if you get my emails, you probably have already seen it. So, and I'll send something out again. So, Jeremy, do you want to share your screen or have some comments at this point?
I thought we were gonna have Matt go right after.
Oh, okay, Matt.
And then I was gonna jump in after that.
Okay, does that work for you, Matt? I mean, you're such an actor and have such great video skills that I'm sure you can handle this at all.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Your students were amazing, by the way. Amazing.
I know. They're, as I said before, they're great sports about it, and it literally was like thrusted on them the day of. And then I pulled those students that were interviewed, I pulled them aside. I said, "Hey, do you mind if they come up and video you?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's fine." I was like, "Oh."
It was as if it was scripted. They were that good. So kudos.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah,
job.
proud of them.
Yeah, as you should be. So, okay, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and I'm just going to go hop in the chat. I also just wanted to let our attendees know, if you have any questions for either Matt or Jeremy, pop them in the Q&A. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay, so take it away.
Oh, yes. So in setting this up, Andy had asked me just to kind of speak a little bit about my involvement in the video, and then also to talk a little bit about the fire interval study, which was featured in the video. And I also want to mention too, and I forgot to say this on the front end, is that a lot of the prescribed fire video that you saw, the actual burning taking place, that was on Stockton University Forest. Most of that was. So like in that interview when Larry Birch, the fire warden there, was being interviewed, that was at Stockton University at the time, which was pretty cool. Yeah, so like essentially the project started almost exactly a year ago. Literally, it was July 15th last year is when I was contacted to get involved in this. Okay. Yeah, so essentially what happened was, like anything, so they were contacting the university, and specifically like our public relations group. And then they just basically asked, like we're looking for an expert in fire ecology, forest fire, that kind of thing, the Pine Barrens. So they naturally asked the environmental sciences program. So they said, like, hey, like, could you recommend anybody? And they recommended some folks. I wasn't on that list because I'm relatively new faculty. But then eventually they kind of like, they said like, well, you probably want to talk to Matt Olson about this, even though, I mean, I do consider myself a bit of an expert in the Pine Barrens, but fire ecology is something kind of new in as far as like my research and everything else. So I wouldn't quite call myself an expert in fire ecology. I'm getting there. I'm not quite there yet. My background's more in silviculture and stuff like that, with not involving fire for the most part, but that's changing pretty rapidly. And I also suspect that Bob Williams had a big role in this in terms of like giving the idea of like reaching out to Stockton. He's been a real champion of the program, so I certainly need to just like give a shout out to Bob once again about that. And so, yeah, so when I was contacted, this was Susan Wallner, who was the producer on this, and you heard her voice quite a bit in that video. She wasn't the narrator, but her voice was kind of like chimed in occasionally. Like she reached out to me and just said like, hey, like, I want to spotlight Stockton University in the forestry program there and what you're doing. And like she basically was saying, I hear you're doing a lot of active management and stuff that you just don't see a lot of examples of what we're doing in one kind of like relatively confined area. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. And then I even threw out there like, hey, you know, like come on out and like film my class as we're out there for a class. We'll just kind of pretend as though the cameras aren't out there and I'll just do my thing with the class and the students will do their thing. And I think they did a really good job of capturing kind of what we were doing there. So that was cool. And so, yeah, so like on the university forest, so what you saw featured there was kind of a combination of things, like the prescribed burning happening there. So like one part was the fire interval study, which was kind of highlighted, that was kind of showcased a bit. So I kind of think that's more of like our experiment. We involve students in that. They get a chance to just learn more about you know, forestry experiments and ecological monitoring and things of that nature. And it also gets a little more involvement in the actual burning that happens on the university forest. Like I actually take my students out there when the university or when the Forest Fire Service, they're the ones that do all the burning, by the way. I mean, it's Forest Fire Service that handles all that. I literally just put it in an application and say, this is where we want to burn. They come on out, they check it out, and they determine whether it's suitable to burn or not, and that kind of thing. And then they handle it from there. And then I just take my students out there. We just observe as it happens. And they've been wonderful. Like they've been really like encouraging for us to bring our students out there, bring our classes out as they're burning, just so they can kind of instruct the students on what they're doing. And students are throwing questions at them. They've just been fantastic. I can't say enough about those local burn crews. They're just doing a great job. So there's like the experimental burns, but we also have operational burns. And so we've been really kind of, we kind of have a backlog of areas that we need to burn on the university forest. We have the Garden State Parkway kind of runs along our eastern flank. And we see that as a vulnerability, you know, people flicking cigarette butts or whatever it might be, that could spark up fires that could spread onto campus. So we're really trying to shore up that eastern edge of the university forest just by kind of burning in those areas a little bit more now. So the last couple of years, I mean, last year we burned 100 acres. This year we burned 100 acres. So we're really kind of stepping up our game right now in terms of burning. We'll start stepping, but so we're kind of like front loading it right now. Eventually we'll start scaling back a little bit and perhaps burning a little bit less. But for right now, we're definitely in like larger burn unit, heavier burn mode right now, just to kind of get a handle on it and try to get fuels to a level that we feel pretty comfortable with. And so, yeah, so like maybe I'll just speak a little bit about the fire interval study itself. So, so that area that was basically started back in 2014 as an experiment that predates my time. So as my predecessor, George Zimmerman, which again, I got to give a shout out to George. He's just done so much for forestry and everything else at Stockton University and kind of putting us on the map as far as an area for, you know, kind of the good things that we do and everything else. But like, so George, he was kind of the prime mover in getting that experiment going back in 2014. Started with like any kind of an experiment, just kind of delineating the area, putting out permanent plots, measuring those plots and all that kind of thing. And then the first fires happened out there in 2015. So that's when the fire treatments themselves began in 2015. And actually started the whole area, the fire interval study was burned all at once. The kind of as like a starting condition. It's like, okay, let's first burn it all and then kind of allow those fire interval treatments to kind of play out from that point. So it's a fully replicated experiment. So basically it means that we have 3 replications of 7 different burn intervals. I kind of listed those out before. So we burn every year, every other year, once every 3 years, once every 4 years, so on and so forth. And then kind of the longest intervals that we haven't even fully realized yet is the 15-year. In fact, it's next year, I want to say, is when we're coming up on the 10-year. So it's kind of a milestone for us that we're kind of getting to the point where we're starting to do our second burns for the longer intervals, which is pretty exciting. So in a sense, we're kind of making this a long-term experiment. I really hope this continues for another century. I won't be around, obviously, but hopefully there is continuity there. So even like the experiment itself, this isn't something that was just like the brainchild of Dr. Zimmerman and his students. In fact, it was something that was loosely based on a decommissioned experiment that was started on what was the Lebanon experimental forest back in the 30s by it would have been like New Jersey DEP, whatever the predecessor of DEP, so basically state land managers, and then in consultation with U.S. Forest Service, Silas Little was kind of a part of all this kind of thing, dating back to the 30s. And that study went for about 10 years, but similarly tested some of the same fire intervals that we tested. However, their study was unreplicated. So you could really say what was happening there, but you couldn't really make broad inferences outside of that experiment. We feel like with ours, with replication, we feel like we have a little more inferential power. We can say a little bit more beyond just the study site because of the replication and the randomization in our treatments and everything else. So just to kind of give you a heads up, so we have basically 2 permanent plots, fixed area plots within every one of those 21 units. I have my classes, like my forest measurements class, my forest management class, they go out there and they do measurements on those plots. And that's how they kind of get some experience with hands-on tree level measurement and continuous forest inventory and all that kind of thing. But the thing is that we haven't done like a really legitimate full sample of all the plots where we can really do a full assessment of the experiment just yet. So we're kind of getting there right now. And I was funded internally with Stockton University, where over this winter time, I'm going to basically hire a crew of students, and we're going to get all 42 plots remeasured, so then we can actually do a full statistical analysis on it. And in which case, we're really just looking at kind of canopy tree dynamics. That's kind of the primary data set that we have out there. But we also do things like we do fuel sampling, and that's more, again, just giving students experience with that. But then we can also look at kind of what the effects of the repeated fires on fuel loading and things like that. And then we're going to bring in some other elements like looking at the shrub layer and maybe looking at some of the herbaceous plant communities that are coming in out there. Because, you know, one thing we were noting is that there's definitely a change in the forest understory plant community that's happening out there as a result of the burns. We can't really say much beyond that it's certainly having an effect, but we don't know the magnitude or the nature of the effect completely at this point. But like, just so anything I can share at this point are really just simple observations, really anecdotal based on fire effects. I don't really have hard statistical results to tell you right now or kind of share with you. But so like the typical things you would expect with like frequent burning, what you can expect is that we're seeing basically reductions in canopy tree density where we're burning, essentially, was kind of what you would expect, is that kind of like use the term thermal thinning that's essentially happening out there as a result of that. And this is I would say disproportionately is negatively affecting or reducing numbers mainly in the smaller size classes. So kind of the overtopped oaks and sassafras and red maples, or occasionally out there some of the scattered American holly. Those are the ones that are disproportionately being reduced compared to some of the other species. Most of the pines out there are the bigger trees, thick barked, and they're fairly resistant to the fire. So we're not really seeing much of a decline in those. Although we are seeing like wind damage and things like that happening, which may be more of an indirect effect of scarring and stuff like that that's taking place. You know, one thing is interesting is like in kind of what you'd expect is that we're seeing very little ingrowth across the experiment. So we're not really seeing any saplings kind of growing into the inventory. And again, it just fire's preventing that from happening for the most part. And that's kind of what we expect. That's not something that's totally unexpected. Now, if you kind of look at the regeneration layer, even below that sapling class or whatever you want to call that, there's plenty of like seedlings out there and stuff. They're just not necessarily advancing into what we call sapling class. That's going to be able to reach that size large enough to survive fire. They're just not quite accumulating into that size range yet. Yeah, so like I kind of highlighted some of the more obvious effects in the shrub layer in the video, so I won't talk too much about that. So what I think is one of the more interesting things is kind of more of the wildlife aspect. So kind of the next direction I want to take this study is to kind of include more of a wildlife response to it. And just, again, anecdotally, what I'm seeing, and I consider myself an amateur birder, I'm getting a little bit better with it, is that in those areas, we see lots of eastern bluebird. Eastern bluebird are using the fire interval study much more than I see anywhere else on the university forest. Like I generally don't see them in deeper woods on the university forest. They're kind of expected. They're not really a deep forest species in my understanding, but they certainly like the fire interval area. I think in part because we're creating more of a woodland kind of structure, I think is more of a suitable habitat for them. And then I also think the fact that we're top killing some of the smaller trees, and they're perhaps nesting in some of those smaller trees after cavity excavators have gotten in and created cavities for them to nest in and stuff like that. Now, I did have a pair of students, and this was my first semester at Stockton, who were interested in doing a senior project with me. So I proposed like, hey, well, we have this replicated experiment. Let's design something there. They're both really interested in wildlife. So I just kind of gave them free rein in a sense to come up with something in consultation with me, but they came up with something. And it just happened to be a really good white oak acorn year that year. And this would have been fall of 2019. And so we collected a whole bunch of acorns, and we wanted to look at acorn removal rates in relation to the fire treatments out there. Basically, the question is, are we seeing differences in the rates of acorn removal in areas that are frequently burned or areas that were more recently burned versus areas that had been burned, say, 3 years previously, where it's been a little time for leaf litter to accumulate and for the shrub layer to kind of rebound following that fire. And so what we found essentially was that the rates of acorn removal were much faster in the areas that were burned 3 years before as compared to those areas that were just recently burned. And I mean, I'm not a wildlife ecologist, so I actually hypothesized the opposite, but it kind of seemed like perhaps what's going on there is with the accumulation of that duff layer, that's creating more of a habitat for like small mammals and things like that to tunnel through. There's a little more escape cover for them. So it just seems like the acorns are being removed a lot faster, perhaps because it's just a more suitable habitat in those areas for those small mammals, which seemed to be, in our opinion, what was really doing most of the removal, which is kind of an interesting little finding. So like the next steps, as far as like some of the things that we want to look at out there. So like some other critters, like I'd look at some other species with relatively small home ranges because it's a small study. So we had to kind of think that way, kind of at a smaller scale. So things like, it would be interesting to look at things like white-footed mice, things like fence lizards, like their use of these different habitat types that we're starting and these different habitat features we're creating out there. Spiders, you know, you name it, like any number of things. I've been trying to encourage colleagues at the university to kind of jump in with me on this. So I guess, you know, maybe at one of these backyard forestry in 90 minutes, maybe in the future, I'll be able to present a little bit more information on the wildlife response. But the one thing I will say, just to kind of conclude this, is that perhaps the most valuable result of this study is really the successful student engagement with things like fire ecology and management. Like it's for me, this is what it's really what it's all about. We're creating an outdoor classroom for students to learn about this kind of thing and to engage with fire managers and natural resource managers and stuff like that as they're actually doing this stuff, which is pretty cool in itself. Yeah, so I guess with that, that's essentially all I had. So I can pass it off to Jeremy at this point. I guess we can do the Q&A later if you have any questions specific to this study.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. That was really good. It's a really positive thing to see the work that continues to go on at Stockton College. And it's really wonderful to see that you're expanding the program outside of those plots, those 18 plots that you were talking about. It's been several years, but I was out there with your predecessor, with Mr. Zimmerman, on a couple of those years, on a couple of those experiments, and it's a really great opportunity for the students and a learning opportunity for not just the students, but for everyone else, because they get to see some of those results of the videos like this. And I didn't want to take away the opportunity for you to build off of that video, because you had a big part in it, and it's a wonderful video. It's really good to see something directed in a manner that was very informative and eye-opening, for that matter. So I'd like to talk about a little bit more about Prescribed Fire in New Jersey. Everyone knows that I'm a Prescribed Fire program manager for the state. I used to be in Division B in the central part of the state, and recently I've come back to the Trenton office to head up the program again. So my hiatus is just ended a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to attempt to show a couple slides here, and let me get the screen share. All right. Has everybody got that?
Looks good.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of Prescribed Fire in the state of New Jersey. So, you know, obviously the mission of the New Jersey Forest Fire Service is, you know, protecting lives and property and the natural resource. And traditionally that's included, you know, prescribed fire, you know, suppressing wildfires. One of those ways that we help suppress some of those wildfires is to keep those fires small by, you know, doing hazard fuel reduction treatments in high hazard areas to help assist us contain those fires and keep them small. The state is broken up into 3 geographical areas. Division A is what we call the northern area. That's north of the Raritan River. Division B is south of the Raritan, north of the Molucca, and Division C is south of the Molka River. As the video was talking about, New Jersey traditionally has historically had a lot of fires. So since 1924 to 2020, you can see the effect of large scale fires. And this is fires that are 100 acres or greater that have been recorded and digitized over the course of time. This is in part some of the work that Ingela Puma has done and has been followed up by some of my predecessors, Nick Skowronski, and I did some digitizing of it, and Trevor Rayner, I believe, helps do some digitizing of some of the stuff that Inga had left off on. As you can see, fire has been a significant part of the landscape, especially in southern and central New Jersey. To a lesser extent up north, but it still has been part of the landscape even during the 1920s to the present for the last 100 years or so. So as we were talking about, the New Jersey Forest Fire Service has been prescribed burning for about 88 years now. Probably one of the longer, it may be the longest agency in the country. I'm not sure if that's statistically correct or not, but we've been at it for a long time. And in 2018, they passed the Prescribed Burn Act, and what that did is that opened up the gates a little bit and changed the definition of how we could use prescribed fire. Traditionally, before, it was kind of that hazard fuel reduction, trying to limit the expansion of and growth of wildfires. But after that, we were able to, and we've just started doing this in the last couple of years, use it for different uses. So here's a little snapshot, maybe the last 6 years or so. This past year is still incomplete, but it gives you an idea of what the state's been accomplishing for prescribed fire in the landscape. You can see a kind of a slow year in 2018. A lot of bad weather, rain, snow that limited the ability to get fire on the ground. And in 2019, you see a dramatic increase, at 28,000 acres. And then it kind of moderated at 26, and it kind of fell back 21, 22, and 23. Some of those numbers in 2021, 22, and 23 are a little low, because in 18, 19, and 20, I was actually going out to private landowners who were doing their own burns and helping get a better assessment of what fire was actually happening on the ground. So it was a lot of work, but there was a lot of fire that was not being captured by us because we weren't actually conducting it. It was being conducted by landowners across the state. So in any case, that could be anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 acres a year that we weren't capturing. And there's still, in that 2021, 22, there's still that missing gap there of those private landowners that were doing their own burns. And that was partly because of COVID kind of took everybody by storm, and everybody wanted to, limit their exposure to anyone else. And luckily, we've gotten past that, and hopefully in the future here, we can start grabbing some more of the private landowners, landowner implemented acreage too. And we had talked about like 30,000 acres being like a goal, and that's what the state looks to accomplish. Is that enough? That's nowhere near enough acreage to address what the deficiency in the landscape. As I think the video said, and I think what Matt might have said, was there's a lot of middle-aged forests, especially in the pine forest out there, and using fire and different management techniques, you can change that and create more of a mosaic across the landscape. In some cases, are major wildfires that happen during the growing seasons. Like we had several this year. A lot of those will burn down in the turf, and they'll change those landscapes from those, mature tree canopies. And because the fire will burn into the ground and chew into the turf, it'll actually roast the the roots and some of the cambium layers on those trees, and you'll have severe mortality in some places more than others, depending on the species composition. But those fires, as I think Bob was talking about, and prescribed fires, they all are good for the landscape and as a whole. So burnable days each year, and this is one of those things that influence those numbers that you saw on that last slide. You see in 2018, there was only 8 burnable days. So that burnable days are days that were suitable during the months of October to, maybe the 1st of April, that we could put fire down where the fuels were receptive. You had good conditions where it wasn't too windy, it wasn't too dry, it wasn't too hot. The hotter it gets, the drier it gets, and the windier it gets, obviously the more problematic it can become to control those prescribed fires. So we try to stay within certain limits to reduce the potential for any escapes of those. And then you see in 2019 that jumped to like 36 burnable days, and some of those numbers really correspond to those numbers that you saw on the previous slide. So what are some of the management objectives? We talked about, prescribed fire being used for that hazard fuel reduction. Matt talked about it, clearing the understory out, making it more park-like, less shrubs and brush. But it also enhances the habitat. And I think he touched on that a little bit too, and maybe seeing some more of those bluebirds entering these sites, utilizing some of those cavities that were created from the snags, from the repeated burns. What we use it for typically is, manipulating that cover, and the manipulation of that cover can be more dramatic in different seasons of the year. So let's take, for instance, a prescribed fire that happens during the dormant season when it's cooler temperatures, the soil moisture is high, and the trees are dormant. They're not pushing any water up the cambium layers. Those typically don't have a severe effect to the ground cover at an initial onset. Now, repeated burns over a course of time, which you saw at the Stockton College plots, it does have a significant impact to the cover. But in general, not every burn during the dormant season is going to do that. However, as I was talking about, burns that happen during the growing season and in the late fall, summer, they can have dramatic effects depending on what the soil moistures are and the intensity of it. And the intensity necessarily doesn't always relate to severity in that case, because you could have a high intensity fire, but pine trees are very resilient, especially pitch pine. So if you have that during the spring, those trees are probably going to survive. But if you have a low intensity or a high intensity fire during the growing season, and it starts to really burn through that duff layer and that root layer and cooks those roots, you can have a high severity fire, and it doesn't always have to be a high intensity fire to do that. So it's pretty cool. And then you can increase the forage. You always see deer running in those new forests, and I'm sure I don't know if Stockton has problems with people going in those plots people trying to hunt in those areas, because after you burn it, you get that lush green vegetation where a lot of mammals such as deer and stuff like to go browse in that, because it's succulent and it's not that woody vegetation that we typically see down in the pine barrens here. And it can improve the structure of the habitat. We've talked about with those birds again, and it can also be used to help reduce or remove undesirable plants. And I got a couple of examples of that in a second here. So, what are some of the resource management considerations? What is the fire severity and occurrences that are needed to meet your objectives? What are you trying to do is really the main thing that you need to ask. And sometimes a fire during the dormant season may not be what you need get the severity to meet the objectives of that plan. So if you're trying to create open habitats, maybe a growing season or more of a spring fire season, prescribed fire might help you accomplish those, or even a fall fire might help you accomplish those objectives better. What are the fuels, the weather conditions, and also the firing techniques. I'm sure Matt's noticed it, those year after year burn sites where it's an annual burn site, they typically don't carry fire that well because there's not a lot of fuels there to really carry the fire. On certain days, really low humidities and some wind, it'll carry it fairly well. But on a decent day, and if you burn it every year, it may not carry that well. So you get those intervals and you let it grow back, and it'll help carry the fire a little better through those stands. And some stands need a greater interval between, and some need a shorter interval. Every forest is different, every stand's different. And I talked a little about the seasons and how long after the previous fire or appropriate conditions are they present. So sometimes you put fire down and the fuels are receptive, but it just doesn't burn that well. You might be able to get back into that stand a lot sooner because there's still a lot of fuel there that wasn't consumed, and you didn't have a real clean burn on it. Or you may have had a really clean burn because you had low humidities, good temperatures, good wind, and a nice backing fire that just cleaned it out really nice. And that may not need fire for some objectives like hazard fuel reduction for a longer period of time. So everything's got its place, and nothing is cookie cutter, I guess is really what I'm trying to say. And then will other treatments enhance the benefits of fire? So in some cases, I think Bob talked about you might have to thin, Bob Williams in the video talked about maybe having to thin the forest out, prior to fire. And that is true. There's numerous forests within the New Jersey Pine Barrens that are so thick and dense that, New Jersey Forest Fire Service does not really want to put fire down in those forests, depending on the proximity of, development, because the ability to control those is difficult. But if you go in there and do mechanical thinning, whether it be masticating or just cutting the trees down and slashing them down and let it get pushed to the ground for a couple of years, then it gives you the opportunity to actually put fire in there and feel safe about it. So here's a burn that was done in 2021. I believe it was done in like early April. It's up at Peak West and Powhatan Tree Farm. It was a collaboration with a wildlife management area and a local tree farmer up there. You can see the photo on the left is basically what the forest looked like prior to. A lot of beech in there. It was a difficult day because it was one of those days we didn't have a real good burn day, and we missed our window because we had some preparation things that weren't quite ready to go when we got on site, and the day deteriorated as it went on. So when we did get fire down, it didn't burn with a lot of intensity. It was very low intensity, very small flame lengths. But even with that said, if you look on the slide on the right, the severity of that low intensity burn was high, because you can see a dramatic difference of a lot of that mid-story, understory tree canopy that got removed. So was it a failure? No, it still was a success, because some of the objectives were still accomplished because we reduced some of that canopy. Here's another one that occurred this past year at Washington Valley Park in Somerset County on May 10th. So now we're getting into some growing season burns. And you can see in the slide on the right, it looks like there's some barberry in there. And, that fire intensity is not real great. But what you do see, like on the slide on the right, is that I think that's that barberry, it looks like it got hit pretty good. It'd be interesting to go back out there, now or in August and see what the effect was, and how much it set it back. again, fire is probably not going to be the only thing that takes barberry out. It's going to have to be other management techniques that are added on with that to knock some of those invasives back. But it's a good start, and using in combination with other tools, it can be very effective. And this is actually that Hubnanian site that Kristen was talking about on the video. This is over in Berkeley Township, and this was another May 12th burn. You could see that the scrub oak was just starting to leaf out, starting to break buds, and you see on the other side of the road what it looked like. So it's the same day, other side of the road, same treatment, but no fire. And on the left side, where you see it's the after prescribed fire had been put through it that day. And so the idea when you have these spring fires or these growing season prescribed burns is when these scrub oak and other oaks and other tree species start to leaf out, they're expending the energy to do that leaf out. And when you burn a site when they're in that phase or after they fully leafed out, they've expended a lot of those resources. So the effect of the burn, if it is to reduce that cover, is going to be much greater than if you had just done it in the dormant season. So it'll be really cool to come back out here at the end of August, September, and take a look and see what the dieback was, and come back for a couple of years and see how long it takes for that scrub oak to actually get established to the magnitude that it is right here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lori for the questions side of things. So let me stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me just collapse that. Okay. So thanks. That was really great. That was really great. I know I have a question or two, but Matt, you've been very busy in the Q&A. I'm wondering if we should go through those real quick, just to make sure if everybody has seen it or not seen it. So do you mind if we do that real quick?
No, not at all.
Okay. So I'm going to just start from the beginning, and I'll also just say, what time is it? We still have a little bit of time. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A for now. But I just want to make sure that everybody gets to see some of your great answers on this. So Tyler was talking about being very fond of pygmy pines in the Pine Barrens, try to make at least one trip a year to the Pine Barrens from where they live in northern New Jersey. So his question is, he thought that some have been burned by wildfire. When burned, are the pygmy pine forests coming back as pygmy pines? So what do you think?
Yeah, so and Jeremy, I'm sure, because I know we were out there not long ago, I guess it was last year, we were out there walking around with a group of students. But I mean, the way I see it is like the pygmy pines are arguably the most fire dependent natural community in the state. I think you can pretty much make that argument. And the pines, even if they totally get killed and like at least above ground, like totally dead, even if they don't lay down seed or anything like that afterward, they sprout back often pretty vigorously, so that they're known for their strong sprouting capacity, especially those pygmy pines. So my understanding, or at least my feeling of it too, and what I've seen, is that it's usually a wildfire is going to help to maintain that pygmy pine forest, and you're probably also going to get some of the sprouting oaks coming back too.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, Matt. So pygmy pine forests, they don't prescribe burn real well with like a backing fire. They really like high intensity fire because the canopy is, very short, but it keeps a lot of the wind from reaching to the ground. So the fire doesn't really back through those areas very well. So they really like high intensity fire. And like Matt said, they're very resilient stump sprouters. And they also are fire adapted in the fact that they have serotinous cones. So it takes that hot fire to open those cones up and release that seed to get into that mineral soil to help regenerate. One example was, 2007 when the Warren Grove bombing range fire happened. It cooked through that pygmy pine forest, and you go there now and it looked like it was dead, but it wasn't dead. It all sprouted back like Matt was talking about. So if you go out there today, it's there just like it was before that fire.
Awesome. So Tyler had also asked a question about to Matt whether he needed to get burn permits in order to do the prescribed burn on the properties, and you answered it. But I thought, and of course you submit the application and then the Forest Fire Service handles it from there. But I thought it might be a good opportunity for Jeremy to maybe talk about if there's somebody that is interested in possibly having a prescribed burn on their woodland property. What's the steps they need to take?
So you could go to our website and we have like 3 applications. So if you're looking to get fire down on your site, I recommend that you go to the website and you download the application for have prescribed fire conducted on your property. And there's 3 different types of applications there. There's one that's a forest fire implemented prescribed burn application. That means we write the plan, we do the site prep, and we come out and burn it for you at a minimal charge. And those costs are up to 25 acres. I think it's like $250. Above 25 acres, it's got like a step process, and it gets cheaper as you get larger acreage. And really 25 acres for $250 is like it's like giving it away, to be honest with you. It doesn't even cover probably the cost of the gas for the day, but we are civil servants of the state of New Jersey, and taxpayers do pay our salaries, and we're providing a service. And for now we're able to do that at a cost savings for landowners that we can prioritize and get fire on the ground on their properties. The other 2 options are landowner implemented burns. So that's a landowner doing it themselves. The vast majority of residents in the state who are land managers or stewards of their land, they may not feel comfortable or have the experience to be able to do that themselves. In the Pine Barrens, there are numerous residents or landowners that they've been doing it for years. It's like been a family tradition, kind of like Mr. Haynes was talking about. And then there's professional services that you can hire. So there's a separate application for that, and we hold anybody that's going to do it as a professional for a landowner at a higher standard. So it's we don't take that lightly. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And when I follow up with people that attended tonight, I'll send the recording, I'll pop it up under YouTube. I'll include the website, a link to the website so people know where to go. So yeah, that was very helpful. That's exactly what I was hoping you would provide. So thank you. What is the role in the consulting forester? Like say the woodland owner has a consulting forester, they have a forest steward plan. Do they involve them in this process as well?
Yeah, we get it both ways. We get it just landowners who are looking to do it on their own, who are just being proactive, and we have landowners who are forest stewards, forest stewardship or woodland management plan holders, and sometimes they're consulting foresters. Reach out to us and do the applications for them and get the ball rolling. So yeah, it's consulting foresters are a mechanism to help get some of this work done.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So Ken asked a question. Do you feel the pine should burn more frequently? So Matt, your answer is perfect, spot on, and that frequency depends on many considerations, but generally speaking, yes. Jeremy, you concur with that statement or have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I said it before. Every forest and every stand is not quite the same, so not everything can be that comparable. Everything has its own place and may have its own specific needs, and fire may be less or more depending on what that forest looks like. So In general, I say I agree with Matt, but like I said, not every forest is the same, so there's a lot of considerations that need to be taken.
Yeah, clearly. And you did mention that in your presentation, so that's perfect. Okay. There was somebody that talked a little bit about the acorn removal. I was fascinated by that a lot of added benefits to the studies that, or the work that you've done. And that's really cool. So just to talk about that. So is fire more important? The question is fire more important for acorn removal, or are critters better at acorn removal? So Matt, you want to explain your answer a little bit?
Yeah, so as I read the question, it's almost asking like, are like the acorns getting incinerated, or is that more important than the critters removing? Is kind of what the way I'm interpreting it. And you know, I can only speak to what we learned in this experiment, so I'll just kind of keep it to that. And the thing is, like we did not look at the effect of like direct effects of fire on acorns. It was actually in a period when we weren't burning. We basically just tracked. We literally put acorns out in the woods, and I had students go out there every day for 10 days and just monitor whether they were still in the spots where we placed them. But it was in the wintertime that we did that, around the time that acorns were dropping. So so the study, what it really addresses is indirect effects of fire on the habitat and what that means for like critter use and acorn removal. And so what we generally found, again, is just that the areas that had been burned 3 years before, we saw faster rates of removal than areas that literally were burned earlier that year. And we attribute that to just changes in the understory duff layer depth or differences in the depth of the understory duff and things like the shrub layer cover and things like that. So for sure, but what we can say is that's the critters that are the ones that are responsible for the removal. Now, the thing is, we can only say they were removed. We don't know the fate. We don't know if it was a squirrel that took it and buried it right next door and it became an oak seedling or what. So we just know that they were moved from that spot, and we couldn't account for them after that. Yeah.
That's interesting. I think we definitely need to have a follow-up here.
Right. I always thought it was interesting that the animals in the forest know which species. So like white oak, like sprouts in the fall, they tend to go for those species first, or those acorns first, and they leave the other ones alone. I always thought that was a pretty cool little niche that they figured out, like, oh, this is going to sprout, so let's eat these now and let's leave the other ones for later.
Right. Yeah, a lot of those white oak acorns we had put down there, yeah, they started germinating right away.
Yeah.
Just nature is amazing in so many ways. It is just pretty cool. So then Tyler also was asking about the study being replicated elsewhere, which I think would be really neat as well. So, and I guess there are a couple of the interval studies. So hopefully we can look at those and compare and contrast what's going on out there. So different forests, obviously, right? But still interesting.
Yeah, I know of at least 2 in the Missouri Ozarks. One of them's been going for a long time. It's been going on the University Forest Conservation Area for almost 50 years, or maybe over 50 years. And then one that's very similar to it in central Tennessee. They've been doing it for almost the same period of time. And they've maintained treatments over that entire 50-year period. So annual burns, literally have gotten annual burns for 50 years.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see anything else. I'm looking in the chat. I think we're good there. So if there's no other questions, I think we're good, and we're actually right on time. So that's amazing too. So any final thoughts or insights to share? Come back, well, definitely next month, right? Because Kristen made a debut today, but we'll be back next month with that. So I'm looking forward to that. So if nothing else, I think we'll say goodnight to everybody. And I hope that you found it informative. If you do have questions that you think of after the fact, by all means, email me. We can get some answers for you. Again, Jeremy and Matt, really appreciate you being here tonight. It was great. And I hope everybody has a great evening.
All right. Thank you, Lori.
All right. Take care, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.